Now, I've talked about a lot of games on my channel, some of which I just don't care about anymore, but one game franchise that I don't mind talking about is one we all know and love. One that's community keeps evolving over time, both in craziness, weirdness, and other stuffness, and that is FNAF. Bit of a brief introduction on FNAF leading to the actual point and reason you're watching this video. FNAF is short for Five Nights at Freddy's, this popular horror video game series developed by the legend Scott Cawthon. The game follows a security guard who must survive 5 nights at a pizzeria called Freddy's Fazbear's Pizza, where animatronic characters come to life and try to attack him. The gameplay involves monitoring security cameras, closing doors, and conserving limited resources such as power in order to fend off the animatronics. As the game progresses, the animatronics become increasingly aggressive and difficult to evade, making it a thrilling and suspenseful experience. The series has gained a large and dedicated fan base with several sequels, spin-offs, and even a movie adaptation in the works. The game's lore and backstory are also complex and mysterious, leading into the community of fans theorizing and speculating about the true nature of the game's events and characters. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that this is a pretty well-known horror game series, both for those who play games and for those who actually don't. Now, if you've been keeping up on the most recent stuff related to FNAF, you would know that their most recent game, Security Breach, is probably one of the biggest projects within the FNAF series, with it being a first-person open-world sandbox game, effectively being the first FNAF game that majorly changes the direction of FNAF, which is true but also not at the same time. Yes, it's the biggest project that's related to FNAF, but I wouldn't say that it's the first FNAF game that changed the direction of FNAF, if you get what I'm saying. Because that title actually goes to FNAF 4. Now, hear me out. If you're someone who's been playing FNAF since the first few games came out, you would have noticed this sort of pattern. The face of the FNAF gameplay is you looking at cameras while surviving the monsters that are the animatronics. And that's kind of one of the many reasons why FNAF was such a popular game. It was a simple and recognizable game mechanic. But that all changed when FNAF 4 came out. This regular pattern in the game mechanics drifted away into something bigger and creative that no one expected, changing every other FNAF game after the 4th. And I plan on talking about it in a much more deeper dive. So please sit back, relax, and let's get right into the video. Now, in order for you to understand how FNAF 4 changed the entire franchise, I gotta first explain about the first 3 games before it. And I know, it might be boring for those who actually played the game, so please bear with me. I might also be repeating some of the same facts, seeing how the first 3 games, gameplay wise, are pretty similar by a lot, so again, please bear with me. But first, let's talk about the first game. The first Five Nights at Freddy's game was released in 2014. The gameplay of the first FNAF game centers around the security guard named Mike Schmidt, who takes on a job at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a family-friendly restaurant that features animatronic animals performing for children's parties. However, the animatronics have been acting strangely at night, and Mike must keep a watchful eye on them to ensure his safety. You, the player, must use security cameras to monitor the movements of the animatronics, which are programmed to roam around the pizzeria and attack you, the player, if you get too close. To avoid being caught, you must keep the doors closed and conserve the limited power supply. The gameplay's popularity stems this intense and suspenseful atmosphere, as you are constantly on edge and fearing for the next jump scare. The game's unique concept of gameplay mechanics were praised by many critics and players alike, leading to the development of the multiple sequels and spin-offs, which you all know. And let me tell you why FNAF 1 was honestly just so successful. First, of course, was its unique concept. The idea of a horror game set in a children's restaurant with animatronic animals coming to life at night was honestly such a unique and intriguing concept. It captured the attentions of gamers and horror fans alike who were eager to experience the game's unique brand of terror. Essentially, this unique gameplay and a unique idea of a horror game kind of just stretched out and made this creative process on other horror games. I mean, mascot horror nowadays, it's all because of Five Nights at Freddy's. There's also the simple gameplay. The gameplay of FNAF 1 was simple yet effective. You had to survive for 5 nights while monitoring security cameras and closing doors to keep the animatronics at bay. This simplicity made the game easy to understand and play while still being challenged and engaging. Then, of course, wouldn't be a horror game without jump scares. FNAF 1 was famous for its jump scares, which were expertly crafted to terrify you with a surprise. The game's jump scares were honestly pretty perfect, timed and executed, creating a sense of tension and dread that kept many players on edge. And of course, there was the replay value. FNAF 1 had a high replay value as players could try to beat the game on higher difficulty levels or attempt to uncover hidden secrets and Easter eggs. This essentially gave the game a longevity and appeal that kept players coming back for even more. And I mean, the characters were great as well. I mean, the enemies were very recognizable by look and had a very cool and horrific vibe. I mean, there was Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and of course, you can't forget Foxy the Pirate. The big four, in a way, if you talk about horror indie games. But yeah, that was pretty much the first game. A simple concept along with a simple game mechanic that everyone could get, with the game having a theme of horror. Now, after the success of the first game, it would make sense for there to be a sequel. The second game takes place in a different location, a sister restaurant of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, which features a new set of animatronic characters. The gameplay mechanics are similar to the first game, with the player having to survive 5 nights while monitoring the security cameras, managing power, and keeping the animatronics at bay. The gameplay mechanics for the first 2 FNAF games are very similar. The player must monitor the movements of the animatronics using security cameras positioned throughout the facility. The cameras have limited power and must be conserved in order to avoid a blackout. The animatronics will try to enter the office through the doors or crawl through the vents, and if they make it inside, that will give a jump scare for you and essentially a game over as well. In addition to the cameras and doors, the second game introduces a new mechanic such as a flashlight, which players can use to check out air vents and the music box that must be wound up to keep the puppet at bay. The player must also keep an eye on their oxygen supply, as certain animatronics can cause ventilation errors that drain the oxygen. The gameplay of FNAF 2 is quite unique. It relies heavily on anticipation and jump scares. The tension builds as you, the player, monitoring the animatronic movements and tries to conserve power, all while knowing that a jump scare could come at any moment. The game uses sounds and lighting as also contribute to the overall sense of dread and horror. The gameplay of Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is tense and challenging and highly engaging, with each game adding a new mechanic and challenging to keep you, the players, on their toes. Overall, FNAF 2 was basically FNAF 1 just upgraded with more mechanics and more enemies that will scare you. Next, you have the third game, and this game took a bit of a more different approach, with it actually being really scary than the previous 2 games. And I mean, really scary. The third game takes place about 30 years after the events of the first 2 games, and the player must take the role of a security guard working in a horror attraction based on the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The attractions features animatronics from previous games, as well as new animatronics named Springtrap, aka the Purple Man, aka William Afton, aka Matthew Liard, and aka Shaggy. The gameplay mechanics of the third games are of course similar to the first 2 games, with the player monitoring the animatronics' movement through security cameras and using limited power to keep them at bay. However, there are also several new mechanics introduced as well. There is the ventilation system. You must monitor the ventilation system to prevent it from malfunctioning and causing hallucinations that can distract or confuse you. Then there is the audio devices. The player can use audio devices to lure animatronics away from their location, but they must be careful not to attract Springtrap, because that motherfucker will jump scare you to hell. Then of course there are the phantom animatronics. If you make a mistake, they will jump scare you. And these versions of the animatronics are not the same as the other ones, because they won't give you a straight game over. They will just give you a BS jump scare and you'll have a heart attack and you'll just be lying there seeing like, what the hell? Why did this happen to me? Trust me, I've been there if you've played FNAF 3. The third game also introduces a new storyline and mythology to the series, as you must uncover the dark history of the animatronics and the restaurant chain they are a part of. The game's atmosphere is also more eerie and unsettling than the previous games, with a darker and more ominous soundtrack and a more rundown setting. The first 3 games of Five Nights at Freddy's are considered to be one of the best horror games ever made, and for good reasons. The gameplay mechanics of the first 3 games are highly innovative and unique, incorporating elements of strategy, survival, and jump scares. The games require you to be careful and manage the resources and make strategic decisions in order to survive, which adds this layer of tension and suspense to the game. Then the game features a dark and creepy atmosphere that effectively builds the tension and horror. The use of lighting, sound effects, and jump scares all contribute to the overall mood of the game. Additionally, the games have a deep and complex storyline that is slowly revealed over the course of the series. Then you get the memorable characters. The animatronic characters in the games are some of the most memorable and iconic in gaming history. The creepy and unsettling design of the animatronics, coupled with the mechanic behaviors of them in a constant sense of dread for players, is great. Then the last thing, of course, as I said before, is the replayability. The game has a high replayability factor, with players often returning to them to try and beat their high score or to unlock new secrets and endings. Basically, the first 3 games were the pillars of FNAF, and built this great story and amazing one at that, as one of the greatest indie horror games of all time. And at this point, people had noticed the first 3 games had the same mechanic and theme of relying on cameras to see the animatronics coming at you. It's kind of like the game's brand. But I guess Scott wanted there to be a different approach for the 4th game within his franchise, with the idea and question of what if you couldn't see the animatronics coming after you. And thus we have Five Nights at Freddy's 4. The 4th Five Nights at Freddy's game, subtitled The Final Chapter, which is gonna be far from the truth, was released back in 2015. And unlike the previous games, which took place in a pizza restaurant of a horror attraction, the 4th game takes place in a bedroom of a child who's being terrorized by a group of nightmarish versions of the animatronic characters. The players take on the role of a child, and you must survive 5 nights by keeping the animatronics at bay using the limited resources you have. The gameplay mechanics of the 4th game are similar to the previous games in some way, with the player using a flashlight and door control to keep the animatronics away. However, there are several new gameplay elements introduced as well. There's of course the new animatronics. The game features of the new animatronics are more nightmarish and unsettling than the previous games. The player must also listen to audio cues to determine the location of the animatronics. Then there's of course the flashlight mechanic. Overall, the 4th FNAF game represents a departure from the previous games in terms of setting and mechanics, but still delivers a strong horror experience with its intense atmosphere, jump scares, and unique gameplay mechanics. There are also several key differences between the first 3 games and the 4th game. First of all is the setting. Like I've stated before, the first 3 games take place in a pizza restaurant of a horror attraction, while the 4th game takes place in a literal children's bedroom. This changes the setting, creating a more claustrophobic and imminent atmosphere, as you, the player, must be confined in a single room for the entire game. Then, of course, as I stated before, there's the animatronics. The animatronics in the first 3 games are based on cute and friendly animals, while the animatronics in the 4th game have a more nightmarish and unsettling vibe. This change in design creates a more unsettling and disturbing atmosphere, as you, the player, must be confronted by this grotesque and twisted version of the characters you are so familiar with. Then there's the gameplay mechanics. While the basic mechanics of the games remain the same, the 4th game introduced several new gameplay mechanic elements, such as the flashlight mechanic that uses audio cues to locate animatronics. These changes adds a new layer of strategy and tension to the game, as you, the player, must be consistently manage their resources and make strategic decisions in order to survive. Then there's the storyline. The first 3 games follow a sort of linear storyline, with each game building upon the previous one, with the 4th game, however, introducing a sort of new storyline and mythology to the series, as you must uncover the dark history of the animatronics and their connection to the child in the game you play as. This change in storytelling adds a new layer and depth to complexity to the series. I mean, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 marked a significant change to the direction of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is the game that marked a new edge for FNAF both in the mechanic and horror department. As a matter of fact, if you really look back on the games, you would know that after the fourth one was such a success in being different from the previous games, the formula that was also well known for FNAF would change with it not being used in sister location, the game after Five Nights at Freddy's 4, with the game being the first FNAF game that mainly focused around the story. And I mean, they still added the whole camera thing and you being in a security room, but that's not like the main focus of the game. You have to go through a whole lot of BS to even manage to get to that section. And if you're saying that Ultimate Custom Night along with FNAF VR still keeps the old formula, I'll just say those games don't count. They don't count. Security Breach tried to add the old formula for the section of the game, but it didn't really work out at all. But yeah, that's kind of it. Now, my viewpoint on FNAF 4 might be a bit biased, seeing how I love that FNAF game, but I don't care. If you agree with me, great. If you don't, oh well. And I know how big this community is and really how nitpicky some of y'all can be, so for my sake, go easy on me in the comment section. But yeah, till next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.